All right. So the next topic is a chip supplier bottleneck starts hitting consumers, and there's general risks throughout all the supply chains. So as we know, component shortages have been driving up prices and things, everything from computer chips, silicon, copper, right? All the components needed to build things, especially building technology. And DigiKey Electronics, one of the US's largest electronic component distributors, raised semiconductor-related components the price roughly by 15%, with expectations to go up to 40%. So we're definitely seeing technology increasing in value. So we've seen places like Dell, Microsoft, even Apple, like their goods on Amazon, their goods on different marketplaces are slightly increasing by 2%, 3%, $50 here, $60 there. And the inventory index, which is a measure of computer chips available in the market, if January 2020 is the date where we ping it at 100, right? We say the value at this point was 100, so we can use it comparatively. To as of yesterday, that was under 20. So almost 80% of supply has been diminished, and this is for two real reasons, right? One, when people were gearing up to work from home, uh, supplies were kind of inventories were emptied because people were buying all the time. They want to prepare for this work at home, this new kind of tech way of doing business. But at the same time, then you had the supply chain shortages. So it limited the amount of supply that was actually available, how much you could get and how fast you could refill your inventory. And as a result, when you add a chip shortage to that, you then have like, we can't even make these products to begin with. So it puts an even further strain on that supply chain. And one of the biggest things is microcontrollers. These are things found in everyday gadgets. These are things found in appliances, even cars, especially when we're talking about electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. These microcontrollers, which are basically like small brains that help operate all the internal components, they're becoming much more expensive. And the reason this is so concerning is because there's a company called the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSM is their ticker. And it makes almost all of the world's sophisticated chips. By one measure, it's about 92%. They make 92% of the world's sophisticated chips. And the sophisticated chips are used in the most complex technology, which as of today, right, as we go forward, we see the technology only gets more and more complex. So the demand for this is only going to grow higher. It is currently the world's 11th most valuable company with a market cap of $550 billion. And the issue here is that this industry, building computer chips, is a very capital intensive industry that you need to spend lots of money on. The average capital requirement to start a single factory is around $20 billion. So this is not something that you just kind of jump into. There's very high barriers to entry. And when you have one company that produces most of the sophisticated chips and a lot of the simpler ones as well, you create a very bad problem, because if most of your stuff comes, they say don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, we get all of our chips mostly from a series of individual companies, but with this one being probably the biggest and most important of the bunch. And the U.S. right now does still lead chip design and intellectual property with homegrown giants like Intel Corp, Nvidia, and Qualcomm, but that only accounts for about 12% of the world's total production, when back in the 1990s, it was about 37%. So we definitely have a very large reliance on companies that are not part of the United States and other parts of the world. And what is really interesting is that Taiwan right now is being heavily disputed, as China thinks like, oh, that's part of us, and we want to there's been talks that we want to absorb that and bring that part of the country. Um, and that puts it at odds with the United States. So it's also in a really weird position, even though there's no thought that China would ever really want to endanger their own chip supply, right? And no conflict, just nobody really wants to risk it. It still puts it in a very precarious position geopolitically as well. So it's all the things add up. It's like if something happened to them, right? If there was a fire, their factory went down, like that would be, supply chains would be just like non-existent. So definitely something to watch for. And these bottlenecks are expected from a bunch of different individuals. They estimate roughly to persist through 2022. So we definitely are going to be seeing supply chain bottlenecks down the line, and chip shortages are something that we should be worried about when it comes to tech. Expect your tech products to increase in value, and expect it to possibly be, especially as we get to holiday seasons and stuff, expect that we might not be seeing as much tech to buy. There might not be as much supply out there. So, and we'll kind of see how this develops. But for now, definitely very interesting of how much concentration of production there is in such a small, very specific part of the world in one small specific company. So,
Interesting.
I mean, I definitely was looking at graphics cards earlier in the year, and they're ridiculous. I mean,
right.
hyperinflated, and I wasn't going near it with a 10-foot pole, just because it wasn't worth it, especially right now. Most of it, and is this because most of them are using it for crypto mining?
No, in fact, one of the biggest strains was in autos because now you're seeing huge demands. They had contracts signed out for like a year or two as all these electric vehicle manufacturers, everyone wants to produce this way, and everyone's pushing really heavily into it. But then they're like, listen, we don't really have that much supply. There are plants and manufacturing lines that have actually gone down. They furloughed, I think Audi furloughed about 10,000 workers. One of the major ones did for one of their factories because they realized that with the chip shortage, they weren't going to be able to produce all these things. They couldn't keep the doors and lights on because they weren't actually producing things they could sell. So this could be, and this is one of the factors that comes into electric vehicle markets and stuff like that is when you're pricing this stuff in now, right, over the next few years, you have to compensate for, well, how much of this can still be maintained given the chip shortage? How fast can they get these products out to the market? How much can they develop when we have these problems? Because as the world gets more complex and needs more microcontrollers, everything needs it. Computers, phones, cars, appliances, anything you use. And the more and more we buy and the more and more we want and require, the more demand there is. Supplies are currently low, inventories are currently low, and the supply chain is having severe problems in general. Not to mention that now we see a lot of consolidation, just a very few entities able to actually produce this supply. And one other thing is that TSM does expect to spend about $100 billion over the next 3 years to expand its production capability. So it definitely wants to ramp up and get bigger. But this is interesting to note because when we talk about why this industry is so hard for people to break into, that $100 billion that they're going to spend represents almost 25% of the entire industry's capital spending, just by them alone. So it's a tough industry to break into, and I think we're definitely going to see some supply constraints, and prices are going to reflect that going forward.
Sweet. That's definitely something to look forward to in the future. And
yes, I'm looking forward to my expensive technology.
We all love expensive technology.
From the sound of it, it sounds like they're also going to be making exclusive chips specifically for one project or another, so that one particular market like gaming isn't going to be affected by crypto, and crypto not going to be affected by electrical vehicles and smart cars and everybody else using these technologies. So as the need increases, so will supply, but also the utility will be specialized and specific.
Right. I think we would need to diversify into more specialized companies because in general, like they just have a huge demand for chips, period. So I guess it really depends on what contracts at what times were filled out, who has priority over these chips, right? If your company has negotiations or deals where they get priority over somebody else, that would probably be good for your company. But I think just as a whole, we're going to see those impacts in terms of projects being delayed and investments being changed and products being more expensive. And, as we get over the next couple of months, we'll be entering into the holiday season. You know what I mean? Like this, we're talking about, things, we're talking about Christmas, we're talking about Thanksgiving, we're talking about Halloween, we're talking about the holiday season into February. So if you have big supply shortages going over the next 6 to 8 months.
Right now is the time to figure out how to match when the supply is going to increase.
Right. If you promised people that you were, or if you have kids, you promised them you're going to buy them this great new technology, if you really did and you really intended to follow through with it, then you should definitely maybe look into seeing what's available now, and not hoping that in November they'll still be like all these computers to buy, because they might not be.
So remember that audience. Oh,